This video is sponsored by Manta Sleep. Make sure to stay awake so you can learn how to get a good night's rest. Growing up is one of those things that is never easy, but that we all have to do at some point. However, it comes a lot more naturally to some than others. Hi, I'm Chrono the Harlequin, and welcome back to Live from the Black Library, where today I want to talk to you about the character arc of none other than Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors. But before I do that, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and consider supporting me on Patreon, as it does really help me out, as I need to get my history channel restarted, for which I'm gonna have to hire an editor and very likely a secondary writer. But if not, your support still means the world to me. And without further ado, let's get into the character arc of Perturabo. Now, the thing about Perturabo is that I like him a lot, and honestly, I've actually seen upticks of support and admiration for him on Twitter, which is really interesting. I can only imagine that people are not sleeping on Perturabo anymore because they're getting better sleep at night. And that is because of the sponsor of today's video, Manta Sleep. One thing they don't tell you about being a YouTuber is just how important a good night's rest really is. It keeps your mind clear and helps you stay focused, which is why I've partnered with Manta Sleep for this video, because their premium sleep masks are just what you need to help get a deeper and more beneficial sleep, especially when it comes to those daytime naps, because as we all know, with the heart of summer here, it's not uncommon for the light to stream in from the curtains and right into your eyes, but Manta Sleep's high quality, comfortable sleep masks mean that's no issue. I personally like the Manta Pro sleep mask, with its silky material and form-fitting grip. Plus, it's also perfectly designed for side sleepers such as myself. But you might enjoy the Manta Sound sleep mask, which allows you to Bluetooth connect to your device to play any white noise you may need, including my videos. So what are you waiting for? Click my link below and check out the Manta Sleep family of products for yourself or as a great gift for a loved one. And use code CHRONO for 10% off your next purchase. Now, granted, my appreciation for Perturabo is part of the fact that I'm just a really big Iron Warriors fan, as I've said over and over, but the thing about him that makes him so interesting to me is that his character arc, and yes, the Primarchs do have character arcs, they're not that static, is very different from the other Primarchs, and even very different from what you see in a lot of characters in general. You see, when you talk about character arcs, generally speaking, the thing people talk about the most is, oh, rising to the occasion, learning to be a hero, or learning to be kinder and a more gentle person, that sort of thing. And in the case of the Primarchs, some of their character arcs can range from Corax accepting his nature as a true being of the warp, or Lionel Johnson acknowledging some of his faults in his leadership and maybe not listening to the input and legitimate grievances of some of the people under his command, something that resulted in his legion fracturing pretty catastrophically and Caliban being destroyed. Sometimes though, a character's arc is actually comprised of them proving that they can't follow through on their arc, and that they were ultimately doomed because of their own inability to listen to the signs before them. Sanguinius couldn't stop self-sacrificing himself and eventually paid the price for it with his life. And Conrad Kurz couldn't accept that his visions were not the be-all end-all, that maybe he wasn't always right about how horrible the cosmos was, all the way up to the point of letting himself be assassinated. This isn't really true though very much for, say, the traitor Primarchs who are now demons, because being a demon basically robs you of a lot of your agency. You are not fully your own person anymore. You are now under the control of your patron Chaos God, and as such, what you think and what you do is going to be in some way influenced and dictated by them. Angron is basically a slobbering animal at this point, but he was already headed in that direction before becoming a demon. Not really his fault, butcher's nails. Magnus the Red has gone from the great scholar and understanding father he once was, to being, in essence, a scheming, mwahaha wizard king. Mortarion has sunk further and further into his bitterness and resentment at his father, and at Guilliman, and at everyone else, to the point where he can hardly do anything that isn't punctuated by some kind of personal grudge against those he believes have wronged him. And he can't even act on his own initiative too much because, if he does, Nurgle will very much punish him, because Nurgle is a very involved god. Angron is fine as long as you're killing people, and Tzeentch is gonna let you do whatever you're gonna do because Tzeentch is probably playing you from the start, and Slaanesh is fine as long as you're creating enough sensation in the galaxy. But Nurgle has very specific plans and designs, and as such, will be pretty damn unhappy if his pawns don't follow through on Grandpa's plans. But what about those Primarchs who are actually not enthralled to any of the Chaos Gods? Lorgar Aurelian and Perturabo. Well, the thing with Lorgar is that he is still beholden to the powers of chaos, but that's through his own worship and loyalty to them that he has in his own heart. That coupled with the fact that we just haven't really seen all that much of him since the end of the Heresy. Perturabo, however, is the only one of the Primarchs who is well and truly free. Free of obligation, free of attachments, free of masters, free of everything save his own desire to do what he wants and run his legion how he sees fit. There is, however, one thing everyone will always be a slave to, and it's their own disposition and temperament. But oddly enough, Perturabo, after becoming a demon, has mellowed out a lot. I think the best way to describe him would honestly be like an uncle who got divorced but is taking it pretty well. However, in terms of Perturabo growing up, the best way to look at it really is his improvements in two specific areas. That being his ability to admit when he has been wrong, and his ability to take backtalk or criticism. In fact, it doesn't even have to be criticism. It could just be anything he doesn't exactly want to hear. Let me kick this off by really showing what Perturabo used to be like when he was receiving bad news, or just anything he didn't want to hear. And this is coming from the short story, Crimson Fist. Grinding silence and gloom filled the throne room. Harsh electrical light shone across the face of the Iron Warrior's Primarch. Across an oil-black screen, the battle played out in bare numbers and raw tactical code. His face was unmoving, impassive, but his eyes held a spark of emotion that made Berossus wary as he approached his master. As the Primarch's adjutant, he had an unrivaled view of unfolding events. The insight was not heartening. The Imperial Fists had rallied and were inflicting casualties. Significant casualties. The Iron Warriors still had greater numbers, but that margin was diminishing. Berossus would have said that the Imperial Fists might even have the upper hand. He kept that thought to himself. The news he bore was worrying enough. "Master," said Berossus, and knelt on the bare metal deck. Perturabo turned his head slowly, his dark eyes fastening on Berossus's bowed head. "Speak," he said, his voice a low rumble. Berossus continued to kneel, his helm held under his arm, his silent chainsword placed carefully on the deck beside him. He swallowed. "Master, we have identified the flagship of the enemy fleet." He paused and ran his grey tongue across his lips. "We have also identified the master of their fleet." He chanced to look up, met the Primarch's obsidian gaze, and looked back to the floor. "It is a captain of the lower orders. Alexis Pollux is his name. Sigismund does not command the fleet. As far as we can tell, he is not amongst them." Berossus could hear only the rhythmic hiss of atmosphere exchangers and the rising beat of his twin hearts. The first blow hit Berossus in the chest. Armor plate and bones shattered. One of his hearts burst. The second blow hit him as he spun through the air. He hit the wall with crushing force, slid down, blood oozing out of cracked ceramite. His body flooded with pain suppressors, but he could feel his splintered bones cut into his flesh. Blood filled his lungs and throat. He tried to breathe. Red foam drooled from his mouth and over his broken jaw. He was a bag of mashed meat, held into the shape of a man by ruined armor. Perturabo stood motionless at the foot of his throne, flecks of Berossus's blood bright on his gauntlets. "Tell Golg to find this lesser captain that stands against us," said Perturabo. "Execute him and throw his corpse into the void." At the edges of the room, ears heard and carried the orders away. Perturabo turned and walked back to his iron throne. On the floor, Berossus's life seeped out of him into a slowly growing pool. Now, it should be noted that Berossus gets turned into a dreadnought from this point on, and does remain in Perturabo's services, albeit in a decreased capacity. But still, that is cold comfort when it comes to, being brutalized by your Primarch and having it permanently affect your life. In fact, there is another Primarch who does something similar, and it's Fulgrim of all people. You see, Fulgrim cuts the head off his main captain, Eidolon, the Lord Commander, because Eidolon had dared to question his decision to attack a random Mechanicus outpost. But he would have Eidolon's head put back on by none other than Fabius Bile. This would, however, leave Eidolon scarred, disfigured, and in permanent pain, something Eidolon would never forgive his Primarch for, understandably of course. And it should be noted that Lionel Johnson kinda did do something similar, but that was because Nemiel had been very ardently defying him right to his face, and he did lose control of his temper. But it should be noted that a lot had been going on, and Lion did feel bad about it right away, as opposed to Fulgrim, who had Eidolon revived as an afterthought, and Perturabo, who basically didn't care about Berossus at all. And here's the thing. Being compared to Fulgrim should not be a good thing for anybody, but Fulgrim had the excuse that he had been thoroughly corrupted by chaos at this time. He wasn't a demon yet, sure, but he was absolutely a slave to his emotions and to the desires and whims of Slaanesh. Meanwhile, Perturabo has no such excuse, especially given that not long after this, we get a full novel which is basically centered around Perturabo being better than Fulgrim. Like, that novel, Angel Exterminatus, basically beats us over the head with the information that Perturabo is far more put together, far more practical, and far more in control than Fulgrim is, and shows us the things he really wanted out of life, but that were always out of his reach because, in no small part, of his own nature. And the reason we know a lot of why he can't have what he wants in life is due to his own nature, at least in this part of his life, comes from the book Hammer of Olympia, where we see Perturabo's early childhood and his return to Olympia after embarking on the Great Crusade and finding out that his planet had gone into rebellion in his absence. And here, I couldn't even pick one excerpt because there's just so much. For example, when Perturabo enters into a competition with one of his adoptive brothers to build a bronze statue, he loses because he got the thing done lickety-split, but his brother took a long time and came up with something much better. So Perturabo, in a fit of anger, destroyed both statues, but left enough of his around so that you could see the artistry of it, so that you would know that it at least once was good. And that's just pitiful. And as we can see with his treatment of Berossus, that penchant for straight-up tantrums never truly left him, and it would take a long time for him to finally move past that kind of fury. To really illustrate how much he's changed, I'm gonna show an excerpt from him as a demon, and as previously stated, this is in essence our first glimpse of him as a demon Primarch. The first big excerpt that really shows us what demon Perturabo is like comes from the short story Half-Breed by Graham McNeill. This short story deals with Honsou's return to Medringard after his failed campaign against Uriel Ventress and the Ultramarines, having to answer for his actions and meet with his Primarch. And it goes like this. No wind stirred Medringard's atmosphere, but the dust was blown aside as if by 1,000 zephyrs as a monstrous figure strode from the wreckage of his arrival. Even before his elevation to demonhood, the Primarch had been colossal, but now he was a giant, plated in silver and steel, encased in armor that was more a fortified sarcophagus than anything wrought for a living being. Edged in yellow and black, scarred from 10,000 wars, and seamed with weld lines like scars. It was known as the Logos, its textures strangely alive, like a skin of metal and flesh combined. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron himself. He went without helm, his head a nightmare of pallid, dead flesh, necrotic and bleached of color, like a corpse dragged from a depthless ocean trench. Thick cords of ribbed cabling pierced his skull, running back across his scalp in hissing cornrows. Eyes that were gimlet black, yet lit from within by the coldest light, stared out from a face that had known only bitter disappointment and had been cursed by inevitable betrayal. Desadra dropped to one knee as the Lord of Iron approached. His mighty hammer, Forgebreaker, had been crafted by another, but had changed so profoundly from its original appearance that even had its original maker still been alive to see it, he would no longer recognize the craft as his own. The Demon Primarch ignored Desadra. "So, you're the half-breed whose name I keep hearing," said Perturabo. "I'm Honsou, yes. You offer no obeisance to your Primarch? No respect? No fealty?" "I do not know you. Not yet," said Honsou, "but I respect the legends I've heard." "Legends?" "Desadra here and all those who came before him told me of you. Foryx never shut up about you, and the great things you did on Terra. I came after those days, but I wish I had been there to see them in the flesh. Perturabo laughed at the clumsy flattery. "You're not skilled at pretty words," said the Primarch. "No," agreed Honsou. "I let my deeds and my actions speak for me." Disadra waited for the inevitable blow that would end Honsou's impertinence. He hadn't lied when he said he wanted to see the moment the half-breed overreached himself. This was surely that moment. He risked lifting his head a fraction, just to see Perturabo's eyes narrow as he studied the half-breed, learning everything about him in the blink of an eye. "Yes," mused Perturabo. "I see some of him in you." "Some of who?" asked Honsou. "Sulaka, the Honorable of the Dodecatheon," said Perturabo. "An apothecary in the normal run of things." "Never heard of him." "No reason you would have. He's been dead for millennia," said Perturabo. "He was not greatly liked when he was alive, so it does not surprise me his legacy is forgotten. But enough of the ancient dead, Warsmith Honsou. The rank Falk bestowed upon you is the only reason I haven't killed you yet. So let us speak a while. You came here for that, did you not?" "I did," agreed Honsou. "So let's speak," said Perturabo. He lifted a dented sheet of wrought iron from a pile of stacked materials and set it upon the broken stubs of a sheared-off column to form a makeshift table. The Primarch set down his hammer and placed his palms flat upon the sheet. "I used the word Dodecatheon earlier. You know what that is?" "No." "It was a meeting place for builders and warriors of the Legion to gather. A Mason's order named for the 12 tyrants of ancient Olympia," explained Perturabo. "Convened by Master Stonemits long before I was ever reunited with my Gene Sons. A rankless place where new structural designs would be unveiled, past battles refought, and new stratagems played out in endless variations to test theories of war. I prefer to test them in real war." "Then you are a fool, and I was led to believe you are not a fool, Warsmith Honsou," said Perturabo. "So spare me your cocksure bravado. It is wasted on me. You have no need to impress me, and no hope of intimidating me. So let us speak as fellow warriors." "What will we speak of?" asked Honsou. Perturabo spread dust and pebbles, rocks and shards of metal across the sheet of iron, forming a landscape of contours on its surface. "Once we did this with holograms and lithographic tables, but sometimes it is good to return to the fundamentals," said Perturabo. "Did what with holograms?" "In all my long years of leading men in battle, I have found that if you would know a man's true disposition, watch him game," said Perturabo. "And in doing so, you will learn more of his heart in an hour than you will in decades of conversation. So we are going to talk and play a game, you and I, and if I do not like what I learn at its end, you will die. And if you do, all in good time, Warsmith," said Perturabo, as Honsou took his place across the table. The Primarch leaned in, his dark-lit eyes boring into the half-breed. "Begin by telling me of Hydra Cordatus," said Perturabo. This is such a different person than the man who beat Barossus to a pulp for simply giving bad news. Honsou lost an entire war, and the first thing Perturabo does is offer to play a game of Warhammer with him. This is what I'm talking about when I say the divorced uncle who's taking it pretty well. It's not just the fact that he puts up with what Honsou is saying, even when he can call out Honsou for quote-unquote trying to flatter him or intimidate him, or just give him bad news. It's because, in no small part, it's such an easy interaction. Whenever he talks to any of his sons in the Horus Heresy, be it Barossus or most often Foryx, it's always very tense, as if they are attempting to defuse some kind of explosive device that could kill them at any moment, because, in essence, they are. It's actually really funny. There's a moment once when Foryx is talking to Perturabo, and Perturabo says, "Wow, Foryx, you're a pretty good leader. Bet you think you could replace me, huh? And Foryx has to assure him that no, he does not want to do that. Of course, Perturabo doesn't think that, but he's just like testing him and just being tense. However, later on, in this exchange with Honsou, we see a side of Perturabo that is again so much more relaxed and so much more charitable and open to his sons. And that becomes readily apparent in the next short story in the list. By the end of the retelling, Honsou had fought and lost 4 games to Perturabo. Each had been a grueling, drawn-out brawl between identically matched armies that ultimately ended in a defeat that had been inevitable since the opening moves. Teth Disadra stood at his right hand, occasionally offering tactical insights, but more often remaining mute as the mock battles unfolded. "You are an intuitive and opportunistic commander," said Perturabo, "quick to seize on a mistake and punish the foe for any errors." "I make a rule to never interrupt an enemy commander when they're making a mistake." "Normally a sound strategy," said Perturabo, resetting the board into another configuration. "But understanding what is a mistake and what is a ploy to draw out an impulsive act is where you lack focus." Honsou shrugged. "I've done decently well so far." Perturabo shook his head. "No, you've been exceptionally lucky. And yes, any good commander does, on occasion, require some luck. But the moment you come to rely upon it is the moment it will desert you. You have owed more to luck than any man ought to be comfortable with, and it failed you during your war on Ultramar." "We were never going to win a war on Ultramar," said Honsou. "It was all about hurting them." "And you did that," allowed Perturabo, "but you could have humbled them. You could have crushed Ultramar because you understood Guilliman's son's way of war enough to turn it against them. Their predictability and dogmatic approach to war was almost their undoing, and had you prosecuted the war with that ultimate aim, you would have won. Instead, you directed the entire aims of the campaign to the service of your personal animus with this Uriel Ventris. I am not as familiar with ancient Iron Warriors history as most of your other warsmiths, but I'm pretty sure I've heard stories of your war-making being driven by personal agendas. Isn't that right, Teth?" Desadra stiffened at the question, trapped by the need to answer honestly and the desire to keep his head. Perturabo was a Primarch driven by cold logic and hard facts, but his past was littered with bloody examples of underlings crushed by his volatile rages. "I can think of one or two examples," said Desadra. "You're wise to err on the side of caution," said Perturabo, fixing the warrior with his piercing gaze. "I am a warrior, unafraid to learn from my past mistakes, but for others to dwell on them is dangerous." "Yes, my lord." Look at that right there. Desadra remembers, because he is a veteran of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, exactly what happened to people like Berossus, and as such he immediately hesitates. However, Honsou is here sassing Perturabo to his face, and yet he doesn't seem to get punished for it. Bear in mind, this is the same Perturabo who literally broke the neck of the only person in the galaxy he loved because she talked back to him, that being his adoptive sister Caliphany, because she points out that his campaigns have always been the most grueling and difficult ones in service of the Imperium. But he's not doing it because he's the most humble of them all. He actually is just doing it so that he'll get sympathy from people, hoping people will see, "Oh, the great Perturabo, look how he bleeds and suffers." Meanwhile, he's choosing to put himself through this because he can't, bring himself to open his mouth. And she says, "You never really became a man" to him. And for that, she gets her neck broken. But Perturabo immediately sobs the minute he does that. Well, one singular sob, but a sob nonetheless. And instantly regrets the fact that he has put his home planet of Olympia, which is now in rebellion, to the torch, comparing himself to Conrad Kurz. Except he says, "Where Kurz had the excuse of madness, what is mine? My temper?" And he expresses deep regret about this action to Forex. Again, I really regret that they killed Forex in the Storm of Iron. I wish we got more of him, I wish he was still kicking around, in the same way someone like Eidolon is. But the first book he ever appears in is Storm of Iron, which was written in 2002, and then he would only start showing up in the Heresy around 2012 and then 2017. So there was a 10-year gap and there wasn't anything they could do about it. Again, it's an unfortunate waste, but it really couldn't be helped. However, it does seem like Honsou might be able to actually fill that role going forward if he's properly brought back into the story, because he's opening up to Honsou in a way that you really wouldn't expect. He's really laying it all on the table for this kid. And we really get to see that right here, where it says, "So you have allowed personal feelings to influence your command decisions," said Honsou. Perturabo considered the question, and Honsou watched the power of his mind turn inward. How many wars and campaigns had the Primarch fought? How many generals and masters of war had he humbled? So many it seemed impossible that any one mind could contain them all. But Honsou knew that Perturabo was sifting every encounter in that moment. "I will admit to allowing my emotions to dictate my war-making on a few occasions," said Perturabo, "and more times than not, it has led to disaster." "How so?" The Primarch leaned forward and said, "Anytime the enemy can know your mind, you are doomed to fail. You used that fact to hurt the Ultramarines, but they used it to draw you into making mistakes that cost you ultimate victory. Perturabo reset the board, this time in a way that favored the defender, a holding action designed to test the resilience of the attacker in the face of crippling losses and the resourcefulness of the defender against unceasing assault. Here, the Primarch would pummel Honsou's forces and see how long he could sustain his defense. Ready? Honsou scanned the board. Another last stand? It's a pointless exercise. Defeat is inevitable. Yes, but how a commander handles certain defeat is as important as how they handle victory. The disease of victory leads to complacency, but defeat can teach you so much more. I don't like defeat. No one does, but we all need to taste it from time to time. Perturabo took his first moves and said, "Why did you come to Medringard? Why did you come to Cullen Gol in particular? It might be a ruin, but it's still my fortress. You abandoned it after the Heart of Blood destroyed it. And yet no one else claimed it. Medringard is awash with strongholds, castles, and fortresses," said Perturabo with a gesture to the far horizons. "A warsmith could occupy a different bastion every turn of the world and never occupy them all. Why come to rebuild atop a fortress your enemies brought to ruin? There might be an infinite number of fortresses on Medringard, but this one is mine. Such a mortal attachment to a physical place is a weakness. And yet you remain here on Medringard," said Honsou, moving a portion of his reserves to blunt yet another escalade, "when you could be out there, abroad in the galaxy, carving a new empire from the flesh of the Imperium." His assault repulsed, Perturabo revealed the real attack, breaching Honsou's defenses and driving a wedge deep into his rearward echelons. "I built this world from the ashen ruins left to me when everything was taken from us," said Perturabo. "Our legion exists still only because I willed this world together in the wake of my brother's failure. But you're not wrong in that it's time to forego such attachments." "What does that mean?" asked Honsou. Perturabo waved away the question as he continued. So Perturabo just straight up admits, "Oh yeah, I have screwed up big time because I got caught up in my emotions and let it affect my decision making." He admits in plain English, well, plain Gothic, that he has screwed up before good and hard and that it was his own fault. And reminder, the things this guy has done to avoid admitting that he lost or that he was wrong somehow have included destroying his own and his competitor's statue and razing a planet to the ground, alongside, again, killing his adoptive sister. And yet here he is openly acknowledging his shortcomings and failures. And here's the thing, Honsou is saying things that, again, would have gotten people and has gotten people killed in an instant 10 times over pretty freely to Perturabo. But Perturabo is letting him say it. And he's not interrogating him, because when you interrogate someone, you don't immediately reveal what you've learned about them right off the bat. But Perturabo is doing just that. Whenever Honsou says something, Perturabo gives his immediate analysis of what Honsou said kind of wrong. Because he's not really interrogating him, he's giving him life advice. I know he said, "If I don't like what I hear from you, I'm gonna kill you here and now," but it's pretty clear he's decided early on that he's going to spare Honsou's life, and in fact just wants to pick his brain. And he's not picking his brain to see if he's the right person for the job, to see if he deserves his position, but more so to help Honsou better himself. He is giving him straight up genuine life advice. "Hey, you're right, we should start letting go of attachments. Why did you come back to this fort? Those attachments are kind of a weakness. Oh yeah, I have absolutely let my decision-making be clouded by my emotions, so I know damn well what I'm talking about when I say that's why you lost." And I cannot stress this enough, the old Perturabo did not do that. If you displeased him, he would simply just eject you from your position of command. We see this in Angel Exterminatus, which was also written by Graham McNeil, much like this short story, where he literally rips the armor off a commander who has displeased him and replaces him on the spot with a commander named Kroger. And believe me, that exchange was not nearly this easy. It was very tense, and Kroger was sweating bullets. This is what I say when I say that Perturabo has grown up more than any Primarch, because he had the furthest that he needed to grow. You see, this change really starts to come about near the end of the Siege of Terra, where Perturabo finally accepts what this war has become and decides to leave on his own merits. Rather than be pushed around by Horus, rather than throw himself at the front lines so everyone can see how the great Perturabo suffers, he just says, "That's it, I'm done," and walks away. We've seen hints of him realizing that he's on the wrong path and that he does need to grow up throughout his entire journey through the Heresy here and there, but it takes a while for these lessons to really stick in his brain, and that's actually a very realistic depiction. You can know what's wrong with you, you can know how you need to improve, but the lessons themselves can often take a while to stick, and as you'll see in the rest of Warbreed, they absolutely have. "You did well. You lasted longer than any other I have set this challenge." "I still lost." "Irrelevant. In this outcome, the attacker will not be able to prosecute another campaign for some time. Their forces are overextended and overcome. Even a small force could put them to rout." "What are we fighting now?" asked Honsou as Perturabo realigned the pieces on the board. "A new engagement," said Perturabo. "Another last stand?" "No. This time you will attack, and you will put into practice all you have learned in your time with me." Honsou studied the new setup on the board, trying not to let the Primarch's words irritate him. He hadn't come to Medringard to be lectured, and he fought to detach his ego from what he was hearing. There were lessons being imparted here if only he could allow himself to learn them. So far, their battles had been large engagements, armies of rock fragments and metal shavings marching and countermarching across imagined landscapes. But this was something different, a three-dimensional representation of something infinitely more vast and complex. A void engagement? "A sector-wide theater," said Perturabo. "One you will attack and I will defend." Honsou's gaze took in the colossal nature of the campaign he was being asked to wage. A war of so many fronts it seemed impossible any one commander could undertake it. Dozens of star systems, interlocking subsector fleets, defenses of such depth that it made even the greatest engagements he'd studied look like frontier skirmishes. Is this a historical refight, or something conjectured? "A little bit of both," said Perturabo. "Make your move. In this imagined scenario, the attacker always makes the first move." Honsou shook his head. "It can't be won. The defenses are airtight." "Proceed with the assumption that there is a way to win." "Is there?" "There is. I have seen it, and I want to see if you can see it." Honsou began conventionally, moving fleets and war assets cautiously, probing the defenses, and waging war at the purely strategic level. The scale of the conflict was too great for any consideration to be given to tactical concerns. For hours, he and Perturabo jousted across the board until it became clear there was no way to penetrate the defenses. 3 more times Honsou assaulted the linked sectors, and 3 times he was repulsed. "Do you know why you keep losing?" asked Perturabo. "Because there's no way to win," snapped Honsou. "You set me impossible challenges, you claim every advantage on the board, and you are Perturabo, the Lord of Iron." "You're half right. But you are losing because you are fighting like every other warsmith I have in my armies. You are fighting in a way you think I want you to fight, but I want you to fight like you. Fight like Honsou, not like any other warsmith. Fight as though this is your one and only chance to humble every man who doubted you, every warrior who looked down on you, not a singular being, but all of them. Fight like you." "I thought fighting like that was my weakness." "When you didn't know that, it was," pointed out Perturabo. "Knowing yourself as well as you know the enemy turns it into a strength. Now, we fight again, and this will be your last attempt." Honsou took a deep breath, and began again, knowing his life depended on understanding the lesson Perturabo was trying to impart. But instead of making war as would be expected, he fought to wrongfoot his opponent, making unexpected thrusts from regions deemed impassable, risking entire cohorts on maneuvers any sane commander would balk at as too dangerous, and proving willing to consign entire armies to death in service of a greater scheme. It was war waged at its most ruthless and bloody, with even the most senior war leaders kept out of the highest elements of the strategy. It was war waged by a commander who knew that any amount of death and destruction was acceptable if it brought victory. Honsou made his moves as though detached from the outcome, as though another force was governing his every action, a force of will dominated by the need for revenge, a mind shackled to a thirst for destruction nurtured over 10,000 years. In the end, Honsou made a move he had been contemplating from the last hour, engineering wild feints and desperate throws of the dice to engineer, and the world at the heart of Perturabo's defenses fell, the linchpin planet that held the interlocking web of defending forces together. With its destruction, a cascading failure of resolve took hold, and the neighboring sectors fell one by one. Perturabo smiled and toppled his commander's flag. "Well done," said the Primarch. "Victory is yours." Honsou sat back, his face slick with sweat, his skull pounding from the stress of maintaining an unrelenting focus on his stratagems. Entire sectors had been set ablaze, the death toll likely in the realm of multiple billions. "You see," said Perturabo, "it can be done." Honsou pointed to the linchpin world and said, "That was Cadia, wasn't it?" Perturabo nodded. "It was. An extreme version of it, but one we will soon face." Honsou looked up from the board and stared into the endless white of the sky. It remained unendingly sterile and bleached of all life, but streaks of blue-black fumes hazed the horizon in all directions. He moved the outcropping overlooking the desolate outlands of Medringard and saw a world on fire with industry, a global effort of industrial output. Vast foundries churned out legions of battle tanks, choking fumes spewed from chemical plants producing weapons and ammunition. His gaze traveled beyond the horizon to see every fiber of Medringard's war machine brought to bear to produce an army of conquest. "What is this?" he asked. "Exactly what you came here looking for," said Perturabo. "A war unlike any other. The Despoiler is calling, and this time I will answer him. But to win, we need to cast off the old ways of war. None of my other warsmiths can think like you. They're all too bound up in whether a fight can be won to understand that sometimes a fight needs to be fought. You have no code, no loyalty to any creed but your own, and the coming war will demand leaders who will fight when every logical thing says they shouldn't. Warriors who will confound our enemies at every turn." Honsou watched the vast army forming up beneath the black sun in the dead sky. "That I can do," he said. Perturabo literally lets himself lose a match, not just alone, but in front of someone else too, that being Teth Desadra. See, that's not something the old Perturabo would have done. Like, at best, he would set up a scenario where his son would lose against him, but he could see how well they do, how close they get to actually making a stalemate or possibly even winning before he defeats them. But here he actually loses. That shows a level of maturity, because he's not insecure. The old Perturabo, when he lost a statue building contest, literally destroyed both his and the other guy's statue. But this, he lets himself lose to one of his sons. That just says a lot. And honestly, this exchange comes across genuinely paternal. He's nurturing Honsou. And moreover, Honsou is not one of his marines who's been with him for 10,000 years. Even Rabute Gilliman struggles to connect with his younger sons, still going on to compare them to people he fought the Heresy and Crusade with like Aenid Thiel. But Perturabo here is literally cozying up and giving a genuine pat on the back to a son who is not only new, but also is half Imperial Fist. And in fact, that Imperial Fist genealogy in him is so pronounced you can see it with the naked eye. You see, Iron Warriors, as stated in this short story, tend to be stockier. You know, a little on the shorter side and a little on the wider side, which is actually useful for them because they spend a lot of time ducking down, in trenches, and things like that. Also, inside machines like tanks. But Imperial Fists tend to be prouder and built a little more upright and taller. You can actually see that in Honsou, so much so that Teth Desadra literally recognizes Honsou's silhouette in the swirling smoke before actually seeing it's him, because of how he stands and how he's built. And furthermore, Perturabo, back when he had Forex at his side as his closest confidant, was still oftentimes bullying him and putting him down. And just, again, making him feel tense, saying, "Oh, do you doubt my decision? Do you think I'm wrong?" I mentioned that before, but here, he's being very open with Honsou and building him up. He's building his confidence. He's pointing out his flaws and his mistakes without putting him down or belittling him. Also, Perturabo used to have this thing where he wouldn't value the people he held close to him. If anyone wasn't up to his standards, he would discard them immediately. But here, as previously stated, he's helping hone and nurture Honsou into a more long-term ally and partner, honestly. Because before, he had the Trident, 3 Marines he would keep very close to himself as confidants, naismiths, and just general advisors. And if ever one pissed him off, he would just eject them, as seen when he literally ripped the armor off a guy for not being aggressive enough in combat and replaced him with the Warsmith Kroger. But here, he's taking the time to invest in his sons, which is actually interesting. Why do you think he would invest in Honsou when he could just do it himself? You see, Perturabo is more powerful, more capable, and more feared by his sons than he ever would be otherwise. He is at the height of his power, to be honest. But where before he would be paranoid about other people trying to look good at his expense, like Forex, he is now trying to nurture someone, because he's confident. He is self-assured. He's got a kind of easy swagger to him here that we see that is just really fun to see. It's honestly genuinely pleasing to see him like this, because it is literally what you see in, say, a good dad or a cool uncle. That perfect balance of good temperament, humility to admit mistakes, and wisdom needed to help others better themselves. That is the kind of disposition that can only come from maturity, and maturity that only comes from growing up, which has been Perturabo's main character arc. I would actually go on to say no Primarch that we've seen thus far has grown quite so much as him. The ones that were noble are still noble, the ones that were bad have only really gotten worse, but Perturabo has basically done almost a complete 180 in his character. Lionel Johnson, sure, he's better than he was before, but he still is, generally speaking, a good person, and one who you could see in his youth, albeit with a few quirks and problems. Guilliman is almost entirely the same person, but Perturabo here is a new man altogether. But what do you guys think? Do you guys agree with me when I say Perturabo has had the character arc of growing up? Do you see something else that I'm not seeing? Or do you not agree and think that deep down, he's still the same bitter guy that we all know and kinda love and hate at the same time? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so. Consider joining my Discord server and supporting me on Patreon if you can, and until then, I will see you in the next video.